everybody goes through trauma. So it's not actually the trauma that's the problem. It's the absence of the connections and the relationships when you go through trauma, right? It's not because what do relationships do? They buffer the stress, they buffer the pain, right? When you have someone you can go and talk to and you can connect with and you can support you through that. Like a lot of people talk, well, it's the trauma. It's not just the trauma. There's two things. It's the trauma, but it's also the absence of the relationships. Because if you're being abused or if you're being neglected, chances are those people that are in that environment that are supposed to support you are the people abusing you and neglecting you. Right. So the reality is it's the two-part process, because if you're traumatized, which most people go through something traumatic in their life, right? Nobody comes out unscathed, right? If you're traumatized and you go through something, those relationships are supposed to buffer the stress. But what happens when you go through trauma and you don't have relationships? Well, two things. Number one, you hold in your pain. And what happens is that pain turns into stress. That stress turns into toxic stress. Is what's called clinically, it's called toxic stress. And what that does is creates a chemical imbalance. That's why you get in fights. That's why you don't have friends in school, or you have trouble making friends. That's why you have ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder. That's why you have these problems, right? And then typically that creates that chemical imbalance, right? Leaves your brain susceptible or vulnerable to developing an unhealthy relationship with substances, because when you put the drugs in that brain responds differently than a normal person's brain. That brain sees it as a form of not recreational use, like Johnny down the street who has a great life, right? But the brain sees it as a form of self-medication. So number one, right, when you go through the traumas and you have no relationships, it compounds the emotions. You develop a relationship with an inanimate object, right? Drugs, alcohol, the bottle, the pipe, the syringe, whatever it is, or whatever behavior it is, because there's a ton of behaviors you can develop addictions over as well, right? And that behavior, you then look to receive. That behavior can only reciprocate something that you're looking for, really in reality within relationships, but is absent and in relationships. And so you're receiving it from this inanimate object. And that inanimate object can only reciprocate it in an artificial way. So I developed an actual relationship with drugs where I didn't take my problems to people. I took my problems to drugs, right? Like when something was going on with me, like I didn't talk. I just knew 100%, I'm 100% confident I could go and I could buy a bag of whatever it was and I could use it, and then it would change how I felt. Now, did I know all that at the time? No, but I didn't know any of that. All I knew was that, why do I have this insatiable desire to continue this behavior? And are so many things going on inside of me that I don't know how to understand or even talk about? And why is everybody in my life operating as if nothing's going on with me? And so I think that, when it comes to the traumas that we go through in life, it's all about relationships. It's all about connection, because what's left over at the end when the event is over, what are you really dealing with when you're healing from trauma? You're overcoming the emotional residue of it's the imprint, it's the memories, it's the emotions that's left over, right? Because if you have a memory with a negative emotion, well, it's trauma. But if you have like when you think about it, you get this emotional charge, right? That's why EMDR is so important, right? But when you get that emotional charge from it, it's like that's called trauma. But if you have a memory with no emotion, well, now you have clarity. Well, now you have discernment. Now you have wisdom. Now you have insight. Now you have the ability to understand your story. And that's a place we need to get to. You can't change the past, but you can change your relationship to it.